Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, or good night. Whatever time it is in the world, this is the Neoliberal Round Podcast. I am Ronaldo McKenzie, and with me is
Dante Nelson.
And today the show is entitled Duplicity, Politics, and an Introduction to Relative Deprivation.
Yeah, what an interesting,
It's quite interesting, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Very interesting.
It's quite deep. Of course, we're going to be talking about OPEC, President Joe Biden, Herschel Walker, and the whole issue of duplicity and hypocrisy politics, and much more coming up on the episode. We have been talking a lot lately and having discussions and carrying podcasts about crime and violence, and there's been much talk about the recent rise or upsurge in crime and violence, black violence that's gripping many cities across the US. In fact, and many of these killings are coming close to home. We actually have we have a poll on several of our feeds, Twitter, Reddit, and also on the Spotify platform that's ongoing. And you can actually go to ronaldocmckenzie.com and it will actually take you to the link to both Reddit and Twitter feeds that's asking questions. What's causing the spike in violence across US cities? Is it easy access to guns? Some people allude to that. Is it social media? Some people think it's that. Is it an inability to control temper and self or lack of conflict resolution skills? Some people are alluding to that. Or is it a lack of parenting, or effective parenting, or responsible mentors? And those are the four options, and it could be others. And if you go to Reddit, there is an option for other. But I was just having a discussion with one of my line brothers from my fraternity, Phi Beta Sigma fraternity, and I said to him, people are soft. People are soft. When you think about people are soft. People are soft in the sense that they cannot think. For them, they can't think. So because their ability to think critically about things, they are quick to violence. Because responding in violence is a demonstration of being soft and weak, because people are not strong enough to engage each other respectfully and to hash out their issues. They are quick to jump to violence, and so people are soft, and we have to develop people's critical thinking so that people can think clearly about things. And there are just and there are other things in the news that we have to get to. One of the things that we wanted to get to coming up on the podcast is this thing about duplicity and hypocrisy. And I made a point recently when speaking to one of my fraternity brothers. I said to him, the issue of duplicity and Pharisaicalism is creeping in. It's an issue of leadership, and I'll say that later on as we think about. I was having a discussion the fact that in 2016 I had a business. I never made much money, and I had to use money from my regular job to put into my business, which made a loss, and I was still taxed, double taxation, and then taxed on the loss that I made, and I was sought after by the IRS. I didn't make much money. But Donald Trump, with a billionaire, paid $75, but the IRS is telling me I have to pay thousands of dollars. I made a loss, but I was still being assessed. I was still being assessed $16,000 plus what I had to pay for my regular $4 job. And of course, there is the issue. And I said to you, middle class people have to endure a lot in this country. We have to suffer a lot. We have to go through a lot in this country. We have to bear the bulk of the burden, because because you find rich people paying $75 after making billions of dollars, or finding creative ways to evade the tax, to evade their responsibility. And if there are those who are low income, so the people in the middle have to suffer a lot. And this speaks to the whole, but at the same time, there's also the issue of duplicity. You know, it's people have different positions on different issues. It's okay. I mean, people shouldn't abort babies, but they go into the back rooms and abort the babies. Do as I do, but not as I say. I mean, do as I say, but not as I do. And that is duplicity, aka Pharisaicalism. Creeping into our society. This is the Nailable Run podcast. We'll have much more. In addition to what's going on with OPEC slashing oil just before the midterm election as an affront, I mean, as a way to influence the US elections. Of course, we know the relationship between President Putin, Russia, and Trump. And of course, there's a lot of Trump-backed candidates who are vying for power in this midterm elections. And of course, we know that President Biden just went to the Saudis, asking them to increase oil outputs, but they made a deal recently with Russia and OPEC to slash oil output by 2 million barrels a day, which is going to affect the economy. And of course, we will talk about that some more later on in the show. And of course, coming up in the show, we will also talk about the whole issue of this, the fact that President Biden has decided to overhaul marijuana, which is quite interesting. Overall, the policy, U.S. policy on marijuana. We'll have this plus much more coming up on the next episode of the Neoliberal Round podcast. Recently, President Joe Biden of the United States announced an overhaul of the U.S. policy on marijuana and moves to pardon prior federal offenses. Now, according to Reuters, in an article entitled Biden Overhauls U.S. Policy on Marijuana Pardons Prior Federal Offenses by Jeff Mason and Doina Chiaku. According to them, it says that Biden took steps to overhaul U.S. policy on marijuana on Thursday by pardoning thousands of people with federal offenses for simple marijuana possession and initiating a review of how the drug is classified. Biden said thousands of people with prior federal convictions could be denied employment, housing, or educational opportunities, and his executive action would relieve such collateral consequences. Nearly 40 U.S. states have legalized marijuana use in some form, but it remains completely illegal in some states and at the federal level. Reclassification will be a first step toward wider legislation, a move backed by a majority of Americans, and usher in sweeper changes for companies and law enforcement and impact millions. Now, Republican presidential candidate and a contributor to my podcast, Mr. John Anthony Castro, commented tersely that it's about time. I absolutely agree. In fact, prior to the 1990s, 1 out of 10 persons used marijuana. Today, it's 8 out of 10 people in the US. So the culture changed in terms of its use, marijuana's use, and the acceptance of it. Now, supports this policy reversal by the Biden administration. So this leads to the question. How will the Caribbean, like Jamaica, respond and interpret this as they think about their marijuana laws and the incarcerations that had stemmed from US pressure and leadership on incarcerations and the illegality of marijuana in the first place? Will they continue on as usual? Now, in retrospect, after freedoms and independence were gifted to newly independent countries, many inherited and continued colonial laws and policies that their former masters have transcended. Further, these countries adopted theologies and philosophies that weaken any competitive advantage they can have or could have, much to the chagrin of their former masters. We will want to see and hear any response from the Jamaican government and the Caribbean people and former colonies who are now independent, who have some of these laws based on the kind of pressures that they had or based on the arrangements that were made after they got independence and inherited the same laws. But I say to you, as we wait, we should not hold our breath. We should not. There is a report in the news, a recent report, indicating that OPEC wants to slash oil production or oil outputs by 2 million barrels. 2 million barrels per day. 2 million barrels per day, which is the biggest cut since the start of the pandemic. And of course, OPEC is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. And you guys might be, and if you read Neoliberalism, Globalization, Income Inequality, Poverty and Resistance, I talk about neoliberalism. The book talks about globalization in the sense that it looks at how the oil crisis of the 1970s created a financial situation within countries of the global south and small countries who had to now go to the IMF and the World Bank and the IDB Bank, go to the big countries to get money in order to help them, because they were it was affecting those countries significantly. And the loans and the money that they sought from these countries to help deal with the oil crisis due to what had happened with what OPEC had done, created a huge oil crisis. What it did was these countries went to IMF and so on and asked them for money, and they said, yes, we will give you money, but it was tied to certain conditionalities, and I talk about that in the book, and much have been spoken about that and written about that. The loans, the money that they were going to give to these small islands and global south countries, such as Jamaica and Barbados and Guyana and all the other countries, Ghana, they had conditionalities. Okay, we'll give you the money, but you have to liberalize your market. You have to deunionize. You have to get rid of tariffs and so on and so forth. You have to get rid of barriers to trade. But in doing so, and tying their hands, so to speak, because the Jamaican government, as Mr. Michael Manley had indicated, the former Prime Minister of Jamaica back then, that they wanted to invest in the economy, to grow the capability of the country and there. But anyway, so the fact of the matter is, today we have OPEC indicating that they're going to be slashing oil 2 million barrels per day just before them, and this is happening just before the midterm elections, right after gas prices had spiked as a reaction to the war, the Russian invasion and the sanctions that America had imposed on Russian oil and so on. So now, what do you think is going to happen in a couple of days from now? In November, guys, gas is going to increase by. You're going to have to pay over $5. It's $5 increase. It's gonna. I'm telling. In November, and the economy is going to worsen. It's going to be bad starting November if this is what's going to happen. Whatever, because. That and we talk about inflation in a sense, and we got a little relief because what happened was that you find that gas price went down by $1.83 or something like that, and President Joe Biden alluded to that, and and the economy was coming out of that inflation that period some time ago, about a couple weeks ago, but now as we look ahead to November and to Thanksgiving and all of that, and to the midterm election, we are going to find inflation again, inflationary increases. We're going to find gas prices rising again. It's going to significant impact. Of course, part of the reaction, and of course, it's not just Russia that's doing this. It's Russia and Saudi Arabia, who's OPEC, led by Russia and Saudi Arabia. And this is a strategy because it's just before the midterm elections. And it is done so that Americans can feel the pinch just before the elections. So that when people go to vote, people can go thinking, see, the economy is bad, so you need to vote Republican, not Democrat. I'm telling you, this is strategy. This is strategic. Just before the midterm elections, and Joe Biden just went to the Saudi president and asked the Saudi president if he would consider increasing oil output. But now he's teamed up with Russia. Russia, who is creating problems in the world, teamed up with Russia. Okay, and is now cutting. And of course, is deciding with, and of course, is going to be cutting oil production. And just so you know, Saudi Arabia leads, is the mouthpiece for OPEC, and Russia and Saudi, they are leading this charge. There is something afoot. I'm telling you, there is something afoot. There is something afoot. There is a strategy. There is something. This is fishy. There's something fishy about this whole thing. The fact that they would wait right before a presidential election to do this. Just before the presidential election. Sorry, I apologize. Just before the midterm election. It's quite fishy that they would do this just before it's very suspicious. It's quite telling. There's something. There is a word that is called there. What's that word I'm trying to find? There's a particular word I'm trying to find here. A word that speaks to motive. Oh, there's an ulterior motive. An ulterior motive behind all of this. There is an ulterior motive. It's very strategic. And I'm going to tell you this. I am going to say this. It is my belief that this was done so to sway the Americans, or to sway the Americans. They are trying to affect the outcome of the elections. They're trying to make President Joe Biden and the Democrats look bad. This is bad. I'm telling you that it will be done like this. Based on all that I have said and the decision that OPEC is making at this juncture. This was a strategic move to provide some advantage on their part. And I'm gonna say it. I'm gonna tell you this. We know that Russia and Donald Trump have a love affair. Okay? They have a love affair. Okay? There is something that is very suspicious about this. We will see how the US will respond to this. Whether or not we're going to have to think about doing fracking again. Whether, of course, America, they will have the President Biden, the U.S. administration have to now think about putting up more oil. But of course, I was reading an article in CNN by a reporter who is an analyst on all things OPEC and Saudi Arabia and on oil. And of course, it is said that President Biden's administration does not have a good relationship with energy companies. Energy and oil companies, so that's going to be an issue that we have. So that's an issue that they have to also contend with. So so these are some of the issues that we have contend with. We'll be right back after these messages. So the question is, how will the U.S. or President Biden's administration respond to OPEC's decision to to cut the production of oil output by 2 million barrels per day? How will they do that? Which, as I say before, which will affect the U.S. economy, because that goes without saying. It affects everything. It affects everything: transportation, food process, food production, so on and so forth. And we already, and as I said before, we already saw the reaction recently with the increase with inflation that was spiraling out of control. So how will the U.S. how will President Biden respond? Of course, so I'm thinking the U.S. had some time ago, the U.S. government or President Biden had to reverse some decisions as a response to the inflation and to the war and to because of what was happening with Russia and the Russian invasion and the sanctions they had to put on Russian oil and Russian gas. And the impact it was making, so the U.S. had to increase oil output and oil production, and they have to now think about drilling, and they had to change some policies as it relates to the moratorium on drilling, or because of course we're thinking about green energy and technology, but we're not at that point yet. But some of the decisions and the policies that President Biden's administration had envisioned, and some decisions that he had already taken as it relates to drilling, had to be reversed. Now have that so they can. Now how will they respond to this 2 million to this? It's by they have to increase oil output. Now in order to do so, he will have to now sit with the energy and oil companies, the gas and energy companies, and of course we know President Biden and the Democrats, they do not necessarily have a very good relationship with these companies because of, the Republicans are said to have a good relationship with energy companies because they are about drilling and they are about oil production. President Biden and Democrats not so much. So, and that's why I'm telling you, there is there is something here that is kind of interesting about this whole OPEC decision and what is happening in terms of political strategy. President Biden's hands are tied. We'll see what is going to happen with him when he sits with the energy companies, or how will he respond, because it's going to be tough in November. We'll be right back after this. And there's some news for you. Philadelphia, or Philly Homes for Youth, wants an organizer. And David Fair, who is the co-chair of TP4C, which also runs the Philly Homes for Youth, had posted that the Philly Homes for Youth Coalition, which advocates for youth with lived experience of homelessness in Philadelphia, is looking for a full-time organizer and coordinator. The position pays $40,000 plus benefits. If you have an interest, please send a message through LinkedIn with your email address, and he will send you the information as to how to apply. So they're looking for an organizer. No, this is needed. This is needed. And I responded, in fact, in a blog, in a quick comment saying that this is needed. And David Ferry has contributed on this show before. We interviewed him on about his work in Philadelphia to bring about equity and diversity, and also regarding his HBO interview for the documentary film that's coming up about Eyes on the Prize. But this is a great effort. It's needed. This organizer is needed. It would involve more than just coordinating homeless youths in the area around housing stability, but also maintenance, which involves a career life plan, supports life skills, and ability to research, access, and utilize resources towards housing stability. What's a house that's not a home? With loving, caring, responsible people equipped to deal with challenges of life so as to realize success and stability. So I'm hoping that David Fair and the coalition can find someone who is passionate, possessing a drive for people, and especially young people, patience, some knowledge of the city of Philadelphia, and experience working with this population, and who is connected, motivated, self-directed, with a high learning curve. Our youth need tremendous support in living critical thinking and the ability to access. Well, let me say this again. Our youth need tremendous support in living in critical thinking, or developing critical thinking, and also the ability to access, having the ability to access resources and using those effectively and optimally. Finally, economics has always been about effectively allocating limited resources among needs and unlimited wants. So coordinating, organizing the experience, which is a solution to homelessness among our growing youths, will also require an economic mindset to organize the program with its limitation of resources to provide housing for the rising number of youths who are homeless. Now, by the way, homelessness, according to the School District of Philadelphia, as taken from the McKinney-Venter Homeless Assistance Act, is defined as anyone lacking a fixed, adequate, regular nighttime residence. However, I must say that this definition does not do justice to the experience and reality of homelessness as it's experienced in Philadelphia. Moreover, that definition describes being houseless or shelterless, not homeless, for a home is more than just having a fixed place at night, but a loving place to grow with family and to have peace, safety, and a healthy situation. Further, studies around homelessness captures the respondents' idea of homelessness, which clashes with the school district's definition. Furthermore, the recent rise in the number of homeless families is due to a decrease in the amount of affordable housing and a and a simultaneous increase in the number of families living in poverty and its attendant social problems. And this was also from a Sage article that you can find in the ReynaldoCMcKenzie.com publication that we have just released. But the issue of homelessness is very important, and it's part of the whole issue of poverty and the whole issue of falling median income. That is an issue, and as we find that occurring more and more, and especially with the oil crisis, that the burgeoning oil crisis is about to happen, with the oil about to increase, which is about to stimulate more inflation. Let's see what's going to happen in November and December, and how we can mitigate all of that. Because President Biden's hands are tied. But this is a good effort. And in terms of, we don't know what the budget is like. The question is, what is the budget? What is the budget that we will have to organize around? That the organizer will have to organize around homelessness. And we know the needs are stark, but we need tremendous support in this regard. But this is great. This is a great move, and we hope that for persons who are interested, that you have a passion for people, and reach out to Mr. David Fair, who is promoting this position, who is actually the co-chair and a very good friend. This is the Neoliberal Round podcast. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to the episode. Before we go into the final segment, which is about 10 minutes, we get into duplicity, politics, and introduction to relative deprivation. So that's the next segment coming up. It's the next segment coming up on this episode. It's more on duplicity, politics, and an introduction to the next episode coming up, which is on relative deprivation, which will be in the morning. Sometime tomorrow will be released. You will hear that, relative deprivation. But I talk at this particular segment coming up, just before we get into duplicity, politics, and relative deprivation. For those of us who's following the show, we're doing a series called What's Life Like Living in Philadelphia. We have 4 episodes of the series so far. We will have more. The one coming up on Monday, it's What Life Like driving or doing Uber in Philadelphia, and we're going to be doing that coming up Monday week. But an interesting situation happened where I was in Philadelphia, we're in Germantown, and I interviewed a young man for the show What's Life Like Living in Philadelphia, and days after he was killed, about 2 days later when he was killed. So I was speaking with somebody a little bit about that as we get into the next segment. So listen to this particular take as I share my fears about living in Philadelphia, and then we continue on, wrapping up 10 minutes of duplicity, politics, and introduction to relative deprivation. I'm telling you, as I was interviewing B-Dot, suddenly I got nervous. In the back, as I was interviewing B-Dot at the back of the store that day when I was interviewing him, I just felt so nervous. I felt as though someone was going to come to the back of the store and maybe try and shoot him, and I'm going to be there while I'm conducting an interview. Because it has happened so many times in that store as well. And in many places where people that was going through my head, and I was trying to wrap up the interview really quickly, and as he was talking to me and I was talking, I seemed fine, like, everything was great, but in the back of my mind, I became nervous while doing the interview. A lot was going through my mind. I wonder if somebody's trying to shoot him. Let me hurry up and do this interview. And the next thing, I'm telling you, that was going through my head. And the next thing you know, he was shot and killed in that same store. What if when I was conducting the interview, he would have shot? I'm telling you, man. And just going through and shouting just now, man, I was absolutely nervous. I was shaky. And usually I'm not that nervous. It's... Now, on the issue of duplicity and Pharisaicism, John Anthony Castro, the 2024 Republican presidential candidate, who has become a friend and a contributor to this show, and someone I follow on Twitter, and he follows me. Very inspiring and amazing young man when you follow his story. He tweeted, he said, title correction, new poll reveals that Republicans are hypocrites on abortion. No, this is a Republican speaking. New polls reveals that Republicans are hypocrites on abortion. And he shares a link from CNN.com that has an article entitled "New Poll Finds Georgia Senate Race Remains Unchanged after allegations about Herschel Walker." And just so you know, Herschel Walker is running against Senator Raphael Warnock, who continues to hold an advantage over Herschel Walker in Georgia's U.S. Senate race, according to a new poll from Quinnipiac University. With the margin between the two candidates little changed compared with polling conducted before allegations emerged that Walker paid for a woman's abortion and encouraged her to have another one. So obviously this particular news is not affecting people. This is not what is uppermost in people's mind. But I actually responded by saying Pharisaicism, duplicity, and hypocrisy are strategies of power and the character of privilege. And I actually had written an article some time ago in LinkedIn. I had written an article, and it was entitled "Privilege, Power, Position, and the Need for Critical Thinking." And you can see that in my LinkedIn newsletter commentary called the Neoliberal Commentary. But what was telling is this particular blog article, where I said, indeed, I wrote a blog article 2 years ago entitled, "Are Republicans the New Pharisees?" Not only on the issue of abortion, a do as I say, but not as I do mentality for more politicians and those vying for power. It's a strategy of power, this hypocrisy and duplicity. So that's quite interesting. And I also continued to respond to the issue of Mr. Castro also said that slowly but surely the truth will be revealed. In response to what I said, indeed, as I've been saying and promoting, communication is to make popular what was the monopoly. Who controls the narrative? No one. Social and digital media, decentralized. And by the way, if you want to see that blog article that I wrote, it's entitled "Are Republicans the New Pharisees?" And it's in ronaldocmckenzie.blogspot.com. You can go to theneoliberal.com to access that. And the news, and it talks about the deficit has skyrocketed, which is like $3.1 trillion under Trump's administration, under the GOP watch, long before the rise of COVID-19 pandemic. And there has been nothing but silence from the Republicans, a party that was once touted as a fiscally responsible, debt-reducing defenders is now indifferent to the ballooning debt. On how they castigated and lambasted President Obama for raising the debt by providing a stimulus package in 2010 to 2014 to help struggling Americans during the economic recovery and to stop the economic freefall following the devastating economic recession in 2008 and ongoing. The GOP had an obsession with the idea that the bond market would punish the United States like it punished Greece, making the country's debt burden unsustainable and soon. Obsession with the idea of frivolous budgetary irresponsibility. In this generation, a defining responsibility of government is to steer our nation clear of a debt crisis while there is still time. And that's what Paul Ryan, then Speaker of the House, warned, adding that President Obama has added more debt than any other president before him. And of course, but under Trump, it's as if they were singing a different tune. And now we're in 2020, and we are seeing the same modus operandi. But to be honest, this is not new. It's an issue of Pharisaicism. It's an issue of power. And as I said, as I study the foundations of civilization, if you look from Herodotus and before him, of whatever we have in the archives, and how writing is developed and how life is developed and became more sophisticated, the more life becomes sophisticated, it's the more sophistication and systematic things are in terms of how people stake their claim and their position and establish their privilege, and in terms of what they do and what others must not do. It's the same. I talk about this in neoliberalism, globalization, income inequality, poverty, and resistance, the issue of the bureaucratic phenomenon, where countries from the global south engage got the end of the stick because they had to follow the rules, the rules set by the World Trade Organization. But those in the global north sometimes find a way around it, and they're left with foreign goods and a disastrous market, and so now we have an immigration crisis where people from the global south, because their markets have been devastated by tapping into neoliberal globalization system that was supposed to provide the kind of guarantee, the kind of growth. They become dependent capitalist countries with a populace that now have to look elsewhere to realize opportunities. And now we're left here in the US with an immigration problem. So that, those are part of the issues when we talk about this Pharisaicism and duplicity. It is also in the issue of economics when we talk about the issue of the bureaucratic phenomenon in terms of economic arrangement and the strategies that goes into economic arrangements. But I don't know if everybody all leaders of countries think as far as to think about that. But there are other issues that you can think about as you look at this issue of Pharisaicism and duplicity. But the same issue when we talk about the issue of abortion and this Herschel Walker issue. But that's not uppermost in people's mind, especially in Philadelphia. We talk about crime and violence, which is a major issue. And also we're looking at this. We have a podcast coming up, an article that I'm going to be releasing, talk about relative deprivation, and we have a poll that's running, as I said to you earlier, that's going on. But actually, there's one I should have put. If you go on Reddit, I have other, but tomorrow I have a podcast coming out that's going to be looking at relative deprivation, that looks at a way of understanding and dealing with the issue of crime and violence, because because some of those options that I present to you in the poll that we're running are really, when you look at relative deprivation, it's a response, it's a consequence of relative deprivation. So that's something that we have to look at and we have to explore as well. And we look at the crime and violence and so on and so forth. But tomorrow we're going to be Saturday, which is today's 12:04. On Saturday we're going to be at 1010 Washington Lane in Germantown for the Day of Enlightenment, Community Enlightenment, with author T.L. Jackson and Dr. Umar Johnson, and it promises to be amazing. This is the Neoliberal Round podcast. We'll be right back after this. Well, this is actually the end of the show. Thank you for listening. And remember to subscribe to us at https://anchor.fm/the neoliberal, and donate to us at anchor.fm/the neoliberal/support. And please access our books, Neoliberalism, Globalization, Income Inequality, Poverty, and Resistance. And you can go on ResearchGate and look me up, Ronaldo-Mackenzie, and you'll see some of my current projects and work and research. You can also look for me at academia.edu. And please do visit theneoliberal.com and ronaldocmackenzie.com. I am Ronaldo Mackenzie, and this is the Neoliberal Round Podcast from the Neoliberal Corporation, and we are serving the world today to solve tomorrow's challenges. What good?